Morning Uganda Extra. Well, it's another very good morning. Welcome to UBC TV. It is Good Morning Uganda Extra. My name is Jagenda Semakola Ziksoka. It is the 5th of May in this year 2022. Welcome and thank you so much for choosing to be with us just right here. We are at UBC at Nile Avenue in Kampala, and this is our headquarters over the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. Now, this is the last segment of our Good Morning Uganda program, and this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. And today we'll get into issues of land caveats, especially because these are issues that concern majority and many of Ugandans who very unsuspecting Ugandans who fall prey to many of these fraudsters. And joining me in studios today is a lawyer, Mr. Terry Kahuma. You are very welcome. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jagenda.
I am happy to have you.
I'm happy to be on this show, the Good Morning Show on UBC.
Okay.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Thank you. How are you managing? How are you managing? Have you been for all this while?
Well, the situation is quite complicated because we are now recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. We lost 2 years, and I think at this juncture we're now just trying to recover. The economy and issues of the law also come into play. And right now. Okay, very important. Fast forward, let's talk about caveats. Let's talk about caveats and why we think, or why you think the world, the public needs to know about caveats. What's a caveat? Well, that's a very good question. A caveat is a legal document which stops any further dealing on land or a certain amount of property or anything you basically think is worth protecting. So this comes into play because the person who is requesting for a caveat has it in their mind that either someone has tried to access their land or tried to steal their property either through fraudulent ways. And in other words, they end up going to authorities of the law. It can be a registrar, it can be a land commission, or it can be anyone who is authorized to then issue out that caveat to you. Yes, to stop dealing on that land.
Let's help the people understand. Because, one, there's a very common blunder amongst Ugandans. Somebody can say, I am Jagenda Semakula, and that's my legal name.
Yes.
But I am also adding another name to my name, Jagenda Semakula Zikusoka, Isajabi, and they think by just saying, I am now Jagenda Semakula Zikusoka, now the law recognizes them because they've said.
Yes.
They've said. People think like that. I now have another name. That's why you have these discrepancies and so on and so forth. Secondly, when you talk about caveats, we need to know who a caveat is and how that actually happens or how it's supposed to be done. Because you will find a family of Terry and Semakula contesting over some piece of property, and they will just write onto the building to say, land not for sale, or property not for sale. And they just leave it at that and say, well, I did it. And so if anybody sells, they think they've done that. Let's talk about that. How does somebody get that legal document? Or if I just write on my building that this property is not for sale, isn't that caveat enough for me to sort it out?
Okay, so your question is like a 5-in-1, but that's a very good a way of asking this question. So when you see this building is not for sale, that is quite different from what a caveat is.
Okay.
A caveat is a legal document, like I said earlier. This document allows you to stop any dealing on your land until a further dispute is being settled. Now, the person lodging a caveat is called a caveator. I'm going to address the caveat emptor later. A caveator is a person who has caveatable interest. So maybe I'm using a very legal terms.
Yes, exactly. And then use the legal terms and explain them to the people.
Okay, so a caveator is a person who has interest in his land. If Mr. Semakula Jagenda bought his land in Mengo or Mutundwe, and a one Mr. Mubiru comes and says, you know what, Mr. Jagenda, I'm the rightful owner of that land. I have a land title here and everything. Yet you, Mr. Jagenda, you've paid your money for that land. You have the receipts, you have the sale agreement, and everything of the sort. Even the person who sold you the land can testify that Mr. Jagenda is the one who I sold the land to. So what you do, you are going to apply for a caveat. So you need to approach a lawyer, because lawyers are the best people who can draft a caveat document for you. So you're going to go to a lawyer. He explained to him what the situation is. He drafts for your caveat. Like I had said, it's a short-term or interim remedy. So a short-term remedy is a remedy which just allows you to stop something in the meantime until you can apply for a further action. So you explain all of this to your lawyer. Then your lawyer is going to draft it for you. He is going to sign on that caveat. Then you who, Mr. Jagenda, you're going to be the deponent who will also sign, meaning you're the person who has interest in that land. Then, after that, you can either give it to someone who will do the formal application for you, or you will do the formal application for you, take it to the land registry of that area where the land is situated. So, for example, give an example of Mutundwe or Mengo. So you go to the land registry of Mutundwe or Mengo, wherever it is, and then formally apply for that caveat. So you'll go with 2 copies, and attached will also be the certificate of title, which is your land title. Most of us know them as land titles, but in law we call them certificates of title. So you attach it on those 2 documents, on the 2 caveats. On the 2 caveats, and you also attach your passport photos, the person who is applying, and also the person who is the deponent who has caveatable interest. Afterwards, then you just wait. So it takes about 10 working days. And also not forgetting that you must attach a statutory declaration. So I think you've heard about affidavits or statutory declarations. This is basically a story of who you are. I, Mr. Jagenda Semakula, I'm a male adult Ugandan of sound mind, and the rest will follow. I bought this land from Mr. Mubiru. Another person has come in saying that he's a registered proprietor. So you state all of your details, and then you wait for 10 working days.
Okay, you talk about somebody who has a certificate of title to the land. How about those with Chibanja interests? Can a Chibanja interest person also caveat their Chibanja?
Yes, because a Chibanja interest holder has equitable interest. Even if you do not, now in law we have what are called, in land law we have, in fact in all kinds of law, we have 2 types of interest. There's legal interest and equitable interest. So a legal interest owner is Mr. Semakula Jagenda, who has bought his land legitimately. But the law of caveats just doesn't go only to land law. Caveats also go to issues of family law, matrimonial property. So that will also bring to different categories of caveats. But if you notice in Uganda and in common law, or even the law of America, everywhere, family law and land law are almost one in the same. So a beneficiary caveat, or let's say caveat on matrimonial property, will cut across to both land law and family law. So I think this answers your question. Exactly.
Now, it also brings me to another thing that I wanted to talk about, the types of caveats, because I think that's also very important. Now, you're trying to bring it out from your submission in there, but let's get deeper into the types of caveats for people to actually understand what they are.
Okay, so they are, I like to say they are categories. They are what are called, now I'll first start with land law. There are issues like caveats on registered land. These also cut across to family law. So when it comes to issues of family law, there are also caveats like beneficiary caveats, the issues of matrimonial caveats. So I will categorize all of them, mixing the 2 components. Because matrimonial property, family law and land law are one in the same, like I had said earlier. So when you apply for a caveat on land, in most cases you find that it is in relation to a family dispute. Either my great-grandfather left land and all of his grandchildren are now fighting for it. So if one of the family members wants to sell that land, then you will apply for a caveat either on registered land. If your great-grandfather had, let's say, a sketchy land title. Back in the day, in the early 90s, people did not have actually verified land titles. So they are caveats on registered land, they are beneficiary caveats, and there are also caveats on movable property. As you know, in land law, and in the law in general, movable properties can be issues of cars, can be issues of chattels. For example, like let's say a kiosk. All of those are components which are not exactly fixed on the land, but they can easily be movable. So for example, now cars, we have issues of logbooks and everything. So if you find that someone is claiming that, let's say they are the owner of your car, and yet you paid for your car legitimately, you can also lodge a caveat on that, since it's categorized as movable property.
Do caveats expire?
Yes, that actually brings me to my next point. A caveat, like I said earlier, is an interim remedy. Interim remedies in law are short-term remedies. So a caveat is your temporary savior. If you want quick relief from, let's say, a doctor, if you've been injured, if let's say you got an injury in your hand, you're going to go for first aid. So a caveat is your first aid. If someone comes claiming that, you know what, Terry is not the owner of his land, or someone is playing with your land title, something like that, you immediately rush and get a caveat, like the process I had explained of lodging a caveat. So that window of expiry is about 60 days. Yes. So 60 days is approximately
2 months.
2 months.
What happens after 2 months that this person has not done anything? Because we are dealing with Ugandans, and we are dealing with our own people that we actually know very well. Because this is interim, and then once they do that, somebody will go back comfortably and say, after all, I actually lodged a caveat on my property, so
my work is done.
And they can wait forever.
Yes.
What happens after 60 days? What happens after 60 days and nothing has happened? Do I put another caveat? Can I keep putting caveat after caveat after caveat after caveat? Or it has to be one and then find a solution? Can I live on painkillers forever? Because caveats are painkillers. Can I live on painkillers until I develop or do anything?
No, you cannot live on painkillers, because even when you look at our body, you cannot live on painkillers. By the time there is pain, it means that it's an indication of something. So by the time you've rushed to lodge a caveat, it means that you must have had a reason, as someone who has caveatable interest in your land. So in most cases, people who have lodged a caveat, they now take further court action. Their lawyers or their counsel, their advocates, advise them to go to take court action, either in issues of, let's say, when it comes to someone claiming that they are the real proprietor of that land, or they're the real owner of your registered land. Then you can look at other remedies like cancellation of title. Or in very extreme cases, when the other party has refused to withdraw their claim that they are the registered owner, then we look at issues of compensation of you who you paid your land, you paid your money, and you feel like, anyway, let me let this go. You can now look at issues of compensation from the vendor.
That's a legal bit of it, and that's how it should be like. But we have people who actually go, lodge a caveat, and forget about it. And once they know that they have lodged a caveat on this property or against this property, then they've done it.
They let it go.
Exactly. They let it go. Now they have a lawyer, like a woman who's also very busy. They're working on very many different things. So they don't remember to come back to you to actually say, we made an application. How far? Let's do all these things. And secondly, because people know that when you go to a court of laws, there are issues that will never end. There are issues that are supposed to be there eternally. And people know these things. So somebody says, let me put my caveat, 60 days, as I'm doing what I'm doing, in a way. So the real situation is what you're explaining, but the ideal situation, where we see people who do it and they never return, what happens to those and what should they do?
Well, I think the ideal situation should be put into the reality moving forward, because like you've explained, many Ugandans find themselves in these situations. Let me just give a quick example. When it comes to matrimonial property, according to the Land Act, you cannot sell matrimonial property without the consent of your spouse. Many people tend to do this, and many spouses, especially the ladies, they tend not to be aware of these laws. So if a lady is aware of this and she says, oh, my husband, you've gotten a tip that your husband is trying to sell land, or even your wife, it could be either or. Your husband is trying to sell a matrimonial property. Then you can go lodge a caveat. After, in the process of the 60 days, in that window of the 60 days, then you can take further court action. Your lawyer can then advise you and say, you know what, if this man wants to sell matrimonial property, or this lady, they did not get your consent, then we can take further court action. We can go to the family court. We can let's say cancel the title that he has come up with. Something of the sort. They are more continuous remedies.
Okay, normally when you look into the papers, especially in pages of classifieds or ads, you find lots of these caveat, etc. And you talk about a legal document. Let the public understand. What happens to this caveat? What happens if you've come to a lawyer and the lawyer has helped you draft the caveat? So what makes it very legal, or what makes it legal? Is it legal because a lawyer has actually written it for you, drafted it for you, and given it to you? Then what happens? You hold it like your national identity card, you hold it like a transcript, you hold it like an agreement, do you hold it like, what's legal about it? Do you gazette it? Do you take it to, that's what I want you to explain to the public.
Okay, so like I had explained in the process of lodging a caveat, there are a number of elements you should look at in any legal document. For example, when it comes to a caveat, you have to look at issues of, has it been commissioned by a commissioner for oaths? In law, a commissioner is someone who makes a document valid. So a commissioner for oaths it's not just anyone. This has to be fully recognized by law council or by law society. So this must be stamped by Commissioner for Oaths. They have their own individual seals. Then it should be signed by your advocate. By the time someone is an advocate of the High Court, then they are fully registered by law council or law society. So these are two components that make it valid.
Valid.
Yes. By the time you take it to the land registry office of that said area, then by the time it's in their records, that means it's a legally binding document because it has all of your details. For example, Terry Kahuma is a caveator. He's caveating his land for this and this reason. For my land in Kawanda, and I'm doing it for about 60 days because of fraudulent issues or issues of a proprietor who has also come up saying that he's a real owner of the land.
Do you know why I'm actually asking this? It's not because I do not know, but I want you to help the public understand. We normally talk about discrepancies in identities. Why you find one person is called Terry Kahuma, and he's another person called Kahuma, maybe Thompson, and these are possibly all his names, Terry Kahuma Thompson, but he has different documents with different names. And what happens is they go to a lawyer and they do either deed poll, or they do an affidavit, or they do a statutory declaration, and it is of course sealed by the Commission of Oaths. Just leave it at that. Then you get to places where they'll tell you, unless it is from the UPPC Gazette, we will not recognize it. Unless it is actually gazetted, that somebody has it and says, but my deed poll is here. It actually say, I was Jagenda Semakola Ziksoka, and I'm now Jagenda Semakola Sajabi. You know, my lawyer Terry Kahuma drafted this for me, and I could have it.
Yes.
But then the requirement will be, or you go to whatever. Electoral Commission will tell you the other day when you're contesting, and they will say, we need a gazette to actually prove that you are the same person being talked about here. And that's why I was actually asking about the caveat
period.
Bit of it. Yes, exactly. Does it also have to get to the Gazette, or once you have it there? And secondly, people see them in newspapers because they are normally newspapers where there are those small, very small and
small articles that you don't read.
They go without notice. People normally, somebody just says, but I put it in the newspapers the other day and the other day and the other day, and somebody produces the copies of the newspapers, and Terry had no idea about all these other things, and the only thing they see is their land is actually going because they advertise in the newspapers, and Terry did not know. So what happens? Because somebody will say, but I even advertise in the papers. What is more legal than the other? Taking it to the papers or going through the nitty-gritty of the Gazette and the legal bit of it?
Both of them are legal.
Both of them are legal.
Yes. And actually in that 60-day period is where it is put out in the Gazette. Because you see, by the time it is a temporary remedy, then the public should be aware that the land in Busiro County, block this and this and this and this, is caveated for this reason. Therefore, if the vendor or if any vendor claiming that they own this land is trying to sell it to you, it has a caveat on it. So meaning that, but it brings me to my next point. For the public and people who are planning on buying land, always aim to look at the encumbrance page. An encumbrance on land is something which is stopping you from going forward. It
a
is
hindrance. It's actually a hindrance, yeah.
It's a blockade.
It's a blockade.
So a caveat, by the time someone has put a caveat on that land, then that means that it cannot be purchased, it cannot be sold. So by the time someone puts it on the Gazette, and they even put the details, the decimals of this piece of land, or it can be family land, or it a caveat stretches even to buildings in town. Yes. So a caveat is something which can be put on almost anything. And as the law keeps expanding, it can be put on almost anything. So putting it in the Gazette, I think people need to be also aware. The public needs to be more, how can I call it? The public needs to be more visually upright in terms of looking at newspaper articles. Yes.
How about situations, I talked about this earlier on when we're starting, where you find a notice on the building or a signpost somewhere on the piece of land to say, land not for sale.
Not for sale.
There are normally those small signages that you find, land not for sale, this property is not for sale. How about those? Because somebody will tell you, let me write on the building for everybody to see that this land is actually not for sale.
Yeah.
Do not sell my land. Or property not for sale. They are normally those. How about those? Because somebody will actually say, having a document like this in my suitcase or with my lawyer or with the newspaper somewhere is not as good as me writing on the building to say property not for sale. How about that, where everybody will see and actually say, there is contest here. I will not buy this.
There must be an issue on this land. Yes. By the time someone puts not for sale, it has basically followed the caveat. Because we're not just going to hang the caveat there on the land like on a stick. But that signpost not for sale is something which is very visual for everyone to see. So actually, yes, in most cases, by the time someone puts not for sale on a very large piece of land or on a building, in most cases is a caveat which has followed. They are either of two circumstances. Either the owner of that land legitimately doesn't want to sell their land and they have plans for that land, or there's been a caveat on that land. It means that there is a dispute on that land. It means that in many cases his title has been played with fraudulently, or they're still sorting out who is the registered proprietor of that land. Or in many and most situations, we live in Africa, and many of our grandparents had a lot of children. So you find that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers owned acres and acres of land. So one grandchild or one of his children wants to sell the land to get money. They are not maybe fortunate in life. So the other children who are land say, no, let's go and approach a lawyer. We need to stop this. So they're going to put a caveat there. So let's assume that this stubborn child of his late father wants to sell this to investors. Let's say Madivani or Meta or foreign companies. Then the foreigners, since they are aware of the laws in their country, they're going to come and do due diligence on the land and find that there's a caveat. And even more visually, they're going to find a not for sale signpost there. And they'll ask, why is this not for sale? So they'll follow up and say there's an encumbrance on the title and say, why is there a caveat?
It brings it to another one now. How would you advise people who want to buy land, who get into buying land, and you only notice when you've already spent your money, you've bought the land, that the land that you've bought is actually a land with encumbrances. How would you help those? Because many people have actually found themselves in such situations where you go, do a deal, Kahuma here sells you land and says, blah, 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 I'm looking for a ticket, I'm flying, I'm going abroad, I'm going all these things. And the next thing is, I have a problem, I have a patient, I have all these things. Then you're buying the land, 20, 30, 40, 100 million shillings. Then you only go to either maybe register your interest on the land, and that's where you find there's caveat, there's this, there's this, there's this. Many people don't do this due diligence. How would you help them, and what would you advise to people who find themselves in that very awkward situation?
Okay, I'm going to give two pieces of advice. I'm going to give the reality of how things are, like you've described them, and I'll give the ideal situation moving forward. So the first situation you need to do is, once you've noticed that there is a caveat on that land or any encumbrance.
You've not even noticed.
You've not even noticed?
No, you've not noticed. There are people who just want to buy. Nasa Mukasa is selling his piece of land, and you know, because Terry has money. You know, we have people who get money, and you don't know how they get their money. In an overnight, somebody has money, and they are now stuck with 40 million shillings. And the next thing is, I need to invest my money, maybe in a piece of land somewhere. So you find a Patrick Ratoro who says, Nains and Nini Takawano, then buy. Now, the land that Ratoro is selling to you has NASA's caveat. But because he wants to get out of it and says, they do it knowing. Say, let Terry buy, so it will be up to him, and the owner, Mia, will be out of this picture. There are those who actually do not know that there isn't a caveat. They just want to buy. We have people. You talk about people who know the law, people who invest, and they say, I'm going to invest my property here, I'm going to invest my money into this thing, so let me do the due diligence and find out. There are people who just want to have a title. They have money and you don't know how they got the money. They have money and you don't know how they got the money in an overnight, so they say, how do I secure my money? Let me buy a piece of land. They're in Kawanda, securing a title. Now, when they go to transfer the title into their names is where they discover there's a problem here and a problem here and a problem here. Kahuma is nowhere to be seen. Jagan is nowhere to be seen. The owner of the caveat is Ratoro. What do you do
in such situations?
In such a situation.
Wow, you've actually described the reality of how things are.
That's what happens in Uganda. They come to us every day.
So in those situations, if you find that, let's say Mr. Kahuma has flown out of the country after selling to you his land, then the best situation is just to seek for compensation. Because in many situations, by the time there's a caveat on that land, actually before you even go to compensation, you need to first dig deep into the subject matter. What is that caveat meant for? Is there a mortgage? Did the previous owner have a mortgage on that title? Most of you who don't know what a mortgage is, it's basically you have gone to the bank to get some money and you have put your land title as collateral. So many people get mortgages, and then by virtue of that there's a caveat on your land. Or you have been in a situation where someone has tried to play with your land. I keep giving this because it's most common. Most people face issues of fraud, and this is one of them. So you first dig into the subject matter. What is a caveat for? Is it a mortgage? Is it fraud? Is it any other issue? Is it matrimonial property? So once you have now, it has now come to your realization, go to your lawyer. Your lawyer is going to advise you on the next step. So in many cases, the authorities are going to help you find this person who has sold the land to you, because he is the only person who can be able to explain what the caveat was meant for. Either he put his land for a loan, he put his land title there, he got a mortgage, and then you can now discuss these issues practically. Because even in institutions where the law is in place, we also have to put in matters of humanity. You can bring both of them into the situation, and then you can do issues of mediation or arbitration. So if the vendor who sold to you the land, Mr. Kahuma sold to Mr. Jagenda the land, and then he confesses that, yes, I actually sold this land to you, and there was a caveat because I got a mortgage and the actual land title is still with the bank, then we can see how we can sort it out with the bank and Mr.
Just yesterday, a lady came from Chihoga, and this is her real situation. She bought a piece of land of about 2 acres from somebody, from Mr. Kahuma, and she of course paid the money and completed all the payment. Now Kahuma is failing to transfer the title to her name because Kahuma used the same title to borrow money from the bank. And the title is with the bank somewhere. Now, Kahuma has not yet paid the dues to the bank, and so the title is with the bank. But Kahuma doesn't want to tell the lady that you paid me all the money, I sold the land to you, but the title is actually with the bank because I took a mortgage or a loan, whatever that is. And now, of course, the lady has pressed on for about 2 years to say, but I paid you all the money. I paid you all the money. And in the last 2 years, we failing to write an agreement for you to actually give me the title, transfer it into my name. Surely discovers that the title is actually with the bank, and this other man is failing to give it to. So what happens in that situation? Can she caveat the land? Can she? What happens to her? Yes.
So in my legal opinion, the best situation is for her to approach her lawyer. Her lawyer can then write to court compelling Mr. Kahuma, who is the vendor, because court can give you a decree, or it can basically order you to pay back that loan to pay back the loan from the bank which you got
because the
loan
bank
from.
is only holding to collateral.
Aha.
Exactly.
So they can enter some sort of agreement, a legal binding agreement, where Mr. Kahuma, who is the vendor of that land, will have a sort of payment scheme monthly to finish up the loan which he borrowed from the bank, and then the title will then be set free from any caveat or any mortgage. That is one of the best situations in which this lady can then recover her title back.
How important are caveats to you? You talked about them as interim remedies, as painkillers, or anything, but how important are they that somebody would actually think caveating land or property or anything?
So there are numerous importances of caveats. A caveat number one, like I said, is your temporary savior. If you ever feel like this land of yours or any property of yours, it can be a car, it can be a building in town, it can be land, it can be matrimonial property. If you ever feel like this land is being played with, or even if you get that sixth sense, you know that the law is here to help you. So it comes in as your savior to give you a chance to find other remedies which are going to protect your land, or in which you're going to recover any property that you've lost. So a caveat comes in as your first aid. That's number one. Number two, it gives you certainty that the law is here to protect you. It gives a certainty that if I put my money in a piece of land or in a building or in a car, or if I acquired this property with my wife, my spouse, whoever it is, or my brother, I know that this land should stay intact. So I think I can frame it under respect. So if you feel like this piece of land or property should be respected, then that's how a caveat also comes in to help you. It's a very, very serious document, and it helps many people to achieve many situations. In fact, to either put their money to good use, because if you bought your land at, let's say, 12 billion shillings, then your money can't just go down the drain. If a one Chris Mobiru or Chris Jagen comes and says, you know, Terry, even if you bought that land at 12 billion, I'm still the registered owner of that land. I bought at 13 billion. And he goes to Nasser Road, duplicates his own title. He comes and presents it to you. So you can go get a caveat and then go and battle it out before a judge or a registrar. So it gives you a chance to prepare yourself also. If you've lodged a caveat, it's a temporary remedy. But you can liaise with your lawyer, discuss with him, show him proof that you are indeed the registered owner of this land, or of this car, or of this property, or your spouse cannot sell this land without my consent. So it gives you a chance to go, battle it out in court, prepare all of your documents, and yes.
Okay, if somebody came to you and they want to lodge a caveat on any property, how long would it take them to secure that? I'm only thinking for somebody who is watching now and they say, this is the way to go for me. How long would they take to actually have their property caveated? If they're watching the program now and after this program, they're moving on to getting a caveat for their property, how long would it take them to secure?
Well, that is a case-by-case basis. It depends on how complicated the situation can be. The other party, there are situations where a vendor, a seller of land, can issue out two legitimate titles and they look exactly the same.
But can two be legitimate?
They cannot be legitimate, but on the face of it, in law we have what's called prima facie. They may look exactly the same. I can make a suit like this which is exactly the same, but it's not the same suit. So for them to battle it out, I'm basically trying to frame it saying the magnitude of the matter. So, and it also depends on the speed, of course, of your lawyer. It depends on also how complicated the situation is. So it's a case-by-case basis, but in most cases it takes a short time. Once you can process the caveat and you can take it to court, like I had said, you have your two copies of the caveat. It's commissioned by Commissioner for Oaths. It's signed by the deponent, who is you, the caveator. Then follow it up after 10 working days. and see whether it has been
So how
lodged.
short is a short time? 10 working days?
About 10 working days.
Okay.
If all things are constant, all things considered.
Okay.
I did a video